What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be going over some of the best and cheapest index funds, and these are going to be Fidelity index funds. So if you're looking for maybe use Vanguard or use something else, you're going to be able to find the same index funds. They're just going to have different names, but they pretty much do the same thing. Before we get started, we have to define what index funds are. Now, if you've never heard anything about index funds, the best way I can describe what index funds are is going to be you can look at them as a basket of stocks that pretty much copies an index, right? So let's say the index is the S&P 500 and you have a lot of S&P 500 index funds, right? And now if you go to Google search and you look up the S&P 500, you're going to see that the value is close to $4,000. So I don't have the actual number. I'll put it on screen. But if you look up S&P 500 index funds, you're going to see that those are a lot cheaper. But the cool thing is if you look at the returns, you're going to see that it's the same return. So if the S&P 500 had a 20% return in a year, you're going to see that the index funds are going to have the same return. And this is because the small index funds are actually just copying what the actual S&P 500 is doing. So the next question you might have is, why is it cheaper than if it's the same thing? All right, so how this works is that these small index funds, they will purchase fractional shares of the S&P 500. Therefore, they're able to offer you at a cheaper price because they only own fractional shares of the companies in the S&P 500. So now I'm only using the S&P 500 as an example, but there are a lot of indices that these small index funds tend to follow. Index funds are really diverse since there's a lot of companies in that basket and you're getting it for a cheaper price. So one thing you're not going to be able to do is maybe day trade index funds, simply because these are more for long-term investors. When you buy an index fund, you should be expecting to hold it for a long time, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, maybe your lifetime, because you tend to get a lot of returns over a long period of time. You're not going to be able to day trade this. All right, so I'm going to be showing you the returns on these index funds so you can really see how much money you can make over time in these index funds. The title of the video also says that these index funds are cheap, and that this is not based on how much they cost. Like if we were to go buy into this index fund, maybe it costs you $200. This is not based on that. All right, so a lot of index funds have what's called an expense ratio. This is pretty much how much it costs to run the index fund. These expenses can be anything like maybe the marketing costs to market the index funds for you to buy them, or managing expenses because there's someone who manages the index fund, right? There's someone who has to pick those companies and put them in the index fund, and it's going to cost them money to run the index fund itself. So that is an expense that they pass on to the people that buy into the index fund. So there's a lot of expenses that go into index funds, and these are passed on to you, the person who's buying into the index fund, as an expense ratio. All right, so the expense ratio is going to depend on the type of index fund that you're looking at. So there are two types. The first one is going to be an actively managed index fund. So this one is going to have a manager who goes in there and actually moves around the companies that are in there. They might sell a company because maybe it's going bankrupt, or they might add another company. So someone is actively managing that. So if someone is actively managing an index fund, that person has to get paid, right? So you're going to see a higher expense ratio to index funds that are actively managed because, it's someone's job to actively manage the fund itself. And the expense ratio itself is different for every index fund. So I'll give you the average. So the average expense ratio for an actively managed index fund is going to be anything between 0.5% to 1%. When you're trying to get into those index funds, you have to aim for the lowest expense ratio. But if you see it go over 1%, then you're going to be charged a lot of money in the long run. Now, the second type of index fund is going to be a passively managed index fund. So this one is going to be less expensive, obviously, because they put it together and there you go. Now you just have it. There's no manager who's actively making trades and adding companies and removing companies from the fund. So these are going to be a lot cheaper. And the average expense ratio for a passively managed index fund is going to be 0.2%. And the cool thing is that this can actually go lower than 0.2% all the way down to 0, which is what I'm going to be showing you today. I'm going to be showing you index funds that have an expense ratio of 0 and also have really good returns. And these are going to be Fidelity index funds. And I'm also going to put these on the screen just in case you guys want to see more information. So the first one is going to be the Fidelity Zero Large Cap Index Fund. And this index fund is going to focus on the largest companies in the US. And the expense ratio is going to be 0. And some of the companies in this index fund include Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. I'm going to put them on the screen so you guys can see the entire list. And that is going to be the top 10 holdings of this index fund. So now if you want to look at the return of the index fund, I'm going to be looking at a 1-year return, which is going to be 2020, because we're pretty much done with 2020, so we can get an accurate return for the year. So this index fund had a 21.12% return in 2020, which is a really, really great return. And if you want to look at the lifetime return of this index fund, which is going to be 15.19%, which is also really great. So that's the first one. All right, so the next one is going to be the Fidelity Zero Extended Market Index Fund. So this index fund is going to focus on medium to small companies, which is small to mid-cap companies. And these are going to be U.S. companies. And just to give you a good perspective on this index fund, some of the companies in the fund are going to be Zoom, which is a company that has seen a lot of growth over the past year. You also have Match, and this is a company that owns Tinder and a bunch of dating apps. And you also have companies like Pinterest in there. You guys can see it on the screen here, the entire list. Those are going to be the top 10 holdings. All right, so looking at the returns, the 1-year return is going to be 16.59%. And if you want to look at a lifetime return, that's going to be 8.44%. So this one has a little less return compared to the one that we just looked at with the large cap companies. It has a positive return, which is what you want when you're investing in index funds. So the next one is going to be the Fidelity Zero Total Market Index Fund. So this index fund is pretty much the entire stock market. So if you buy into this index fund, you're pretty much buying the entire market. And just to be specific, this is going to be the US stock market. So you're not investing in international stocks or anything like that. All right, so looking at the returns for this index fund, you're looking at a 1-year return of 20.50% and a lifetime return of 14.85%, which is also great. All right, so moving on to the last one, which is the Fidelity Zero International Index Fund. So this index fund is pretty much going to focus on international markets. It's going to include companies that are not in the US, and it is also going to focus on international emerging stock markets, which is really cool. So now if you want to look at the returns for this, we're looking at a 1-year return of 11.05% and a lifetime return of 7.57%. Not as high as the other ones that I just went through, but these are still positive returns, which is what you want to see. And some of the companies that are in this index fund include Alibaba, Tencent, and a bunch of other international companies that you can see on the screen now. And one thing I forgot to mention is that all these have a 0 transaction fee, which means if you go ahead and buy this index fund, you're not going to get charged a transaction fee. If you decide to sell it, you don't get charged any transaction fees. So that is pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think. If you know any other good index funds, put them in the comment section below. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.